All right, there we go. Starting again. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Culturally Linguistically Diverse Transition presentation. It's part of the Alabama State Department of Education's State Professional Development Grant Transition Series. And just to get started, we thought it would be fun to check in on how everyone is feeling today in the Jamboard. This also gets us a chance, because we're going to be using the Jamboard today, for you all to get in there and work out any kind of technical difficulties there might be. I have put the link in the chat. So if you would just take a minute and go to Jamboard and use the annotate tools, you can indicate on this little graphic of sunshine to stormy weather how you are feeling today. And I can see that people are drawing. And I will tell you, I don't have the straightest arrows myself, so don't feel bad if you aren't able to use your mouse and draw a straight line to how you are feeling. And please tell us if you're having technical difficulties so we can help you now and it doesn't interrupt the rest of the presentation.
All right, this is Rhonda. How do you draw, or where the little bird? Is that what we're using to annotate?
You can use that. Over at the left-hand side, you have tools that you may use. And you have a little bird because that's what the Jamboard assigned you when you came in. You can see up at the top, we have an anonymous gopher, an anonymous squirrel, an anonymous crow, an anonymous beaver. So that's why the bird's showing up.
Okay.
Oh, good so far.
Okay, June, I'm having technical difficulties. I got locked out of the Zoom meeting. This happened yesterday.
So maybe you shouldn't go back and forth, Gary.
I think so. But I'm going back to the original email to get into the meeting. And well, let's see, maybe if I get out of chat, it'll let me back in. I don't know.
Okay, and you can, right now would be a good time to leave and come back if you need to do that. I know you had a few difficulties yesterday and we just won't have you go to Jamboard.
Yeah. All right, let's see here. Try to minimize this and see what happens.
Okay, we have about four, it looks like 4 people have responded with sunny. Like we have a few more that have joined us. Welcome. If you just joined us, we have, somebody turned it blue. Now I don't know how to put the graphic back up. That's my technical difficulty. If you are just joining us, we have put a link in the chat to Jamboard to have you share with us how your day is going today, from sunny to cloudy. And unfortunately, the background disappeared and I don't know how to get it back. Let's see, set background. I think somebody was playing with the backgrounds and I don't know that I have that file right in front of me. Okay, well, we'll stop and we'll get started with the presentation. It looked like most of us are in a sunny mood today. I have bright sunshine out my window in Michigan. And we will is Celeste going to kick us off, Rhonda?
I'm going to be the Celeste. I am standing in for Celeste, and she had an engagement. So, but good afternoon. It's nice to see everybody. Tamala, you've got internet connection this time. Yay! Good. Welcome to the 5th and final transition training presentation. And on behalf of the SPDIG director, Celeste Minor, and the State Department of Education Special Education Services Department, thank you all for joining us with this transition training. And I don't think I have to remind anybody because everybody has their name up and I have everybody's email address. So thank you in advance. And of course, you'll get a QR code at the end or a link to evaluate our presenters. And I'm pretty sure Dr. Gothberg has it in her presentation already. So anyhow, without further ado,
I am not 100% sure I have the evaluation link. So
no worries.
When we get there, I'll let you share.
Yes, no worries. I have it at the bottom of my screen and I can dump it in the chat room at any time. So we're all good, but thank you guys. And this one is one I have really been looking forward to. So take it away, June and Gary.
Well, we're excited to be here. Gary, are you ready to introduce yourself? You need to come off mute.
Yes, I'm back and ready to introduce myself. Hello, everybody. My name's Gary Greene. I'm a former special education teacher. I taught 10 years in an Orange County school district with mild, moderate kids. And then I got my PhD at UC Riverside in special ed. And after I finished my degree, there was a professional development grant that was awarded to Cal State Long Beach to train transition specialists. And I was recruited to be the trainer the coordinator of that program. So over a 6-year period, I trained about 100 transition specialists in various disciplines from, vocational education, special education, and adult services. And then that kind of became my area of expertise on faculty. And over the 25 years that I was at Cal State Long Beach, did a lot of writing and publishing and presenting in that area. And eventually cultural diversity and linguistic diversity became kind of a priority because there was so much of it. It's everywhere now, but in Southern California, that was a major thing going on. And our university was very leading in that area. And so I wound up getting interested in this topic with respect to transition and wrote a publication. And then June and I crossed paths eventually, and we've kind of been working together ever since. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today. And I hope that my knowledge and expertise and June's knowledge and expertise and the information that we share with you will facilitate making you better professionals at what you do, because without you, there ain't nothing. Thanks.
Exactly. So I am June Gothberg. I am currently at the Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability at Cornell University. This is a newer position for me. I'm in my 3rd year. It has been absolutely fabulous to work with 90 colleagues, all focused on transition and employment for people with disabilities. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Just a bit about me. So Gary kind of gave you a background about him. I am an Indigenous woman. I am a 1st generation high school graduate that has gone on to get my PhD. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. If you aren't aware of it, the highest suicide rates in the country are with Indigenous youth. And in particular, there's a really high rate of suicide with middle schoolers. So this is critical work, and I applaud you for being here today. And I look forward to knowing you a little more in the future and hearing what you're doing. So that's what I bring to the table. I did spend 10 years in the classroom. My first couple of years were with adjudicated youth. All of my students were tethered. So that was a really interesting start. And that's when I got interested in special education, because these students that I had, this is not legal, so don't do this yourselves, but they had waived their special education rights to come to this alternative school. And there was about a 95% rate of these students having previously had an IEP. So I went back and got my special education degree and spent another 8 years in the classroom in special education in various settings. But my focus was always on transition. I'll probably tell you a little more later about my journey, but I decided I wanted to, when I was in the classroom, I wanted to make a bigger difference. I felt like I had gained some knowledge I wanted to share. I really only went back to get my master's, and I ended up doing a PhD so that I could be able to reach more people. Currently, I am not teaching. I am faculty, but I'm not teaching. I have 4 different disability focused grants that I am either PI or COI on, and you may hear about some of those as we go. Now, this was unplanned. This is totally unplanned. We have a really small group today, and this feels more like a roundtable situation. And I would love, if you don't mind, to come off mute to introduce yourselves to Gary and I. Just tell us who you are, what your role is, and a little bit about either why you're here today or why you feel like this topic is important. And you can either just do it, or I can call on people. It'll be like across the screen who I see.
I'll go first.
Okay, Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Byers, and I am a retired educator administrator with 30 years in special education, many years at the high school level. So transition is kind of near and dear to my heart. I work part-time with the State Department of Education, Alabama, with the SPDIG grant. So for the last 5 years, I've been involved in the transition side. There was a transition piece and a behavior piece, and I've been involved with the transition side. So I have loved every minute of this job. It's just been probably the best job I've ever had, just in as it relates to special education, and simply because it's given me a different perspective. It's just fun meeting new people, making new connections, but also to see just how much work needs to be done with transition moving forward. So I'm excited to be here and learn from you.
Diane, you want to take off your, put yourself on video so we can see your lovely face?
Well, I played pickleball all morning and I have my ball cap on. Is that okay?
That's just
Sure.
great.
That's great.
I have a shirt that's causing all kinds of things going on the screen, so good.
So
Hey,
anyway,
there we go.
Hey, girl.
Hi.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, I played all morning, so I just came home and quickly got everything together. So, so if you don't mind my ball cap, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yay.
Okay.
Yay.
I know it's
Just
not
a
very
small,
professional, but
just a small group of us, though.
I'll go next. I'm Diane's partner in crime. I'm the other transition coach I'm a retired educator for, I've been actually in the field now 42 years. I am working with the State Department and the SPDIG on the transition side of the grant. Love my job. I can't say, just like Diane, it's the best job I ever had. I meet a lot of very interesting people, a lot of diverse people, and this webinar today will just be so good for me, and I just can't wait to learn a lot from you.
Great. You want to show us your face, Donna?
I may for just a minute, but you're probably going to regret it.
That's fine.
Let's see, how do I
No
do
worries.
it? All right.
There you
All
go.
right.
Hey,
I'm
Yay,
here.
welcome.
Mhm.
I'm glad
So
you're here.
I'm actually a person. I'm here.
okay.
But
There's
I'm
space.
so excited about today. It is just, the more I can learn about transition, the more I can help the students of Alabama.
Great. Appreciate your positive attitude and energy.
Well,
Right.
I'm Vicki Brown, and I've had 40 years as a special ed teacher, special ed coordinator, and director of student services. And then I retired in 2014. And about 3 months later, I absolutely failed retirement and started working with the SPDIG grant. I mean, I failed it bad. And I've worked with the SPDIG grant with the State Department of Education since 2014. We started out with co-teaching, co-planning, champs, and foundations, and we're really excited. So this is my 48th or 9th year, who's counting? But anyway, just real excited about supported transition. So after all these years of being on the other side of the table as a service provider, you know, as a teacher and administrator at the high school level, now I'm on the other side of the table, and that my little 4-year-old grandson, who's here today, was diagnosed with autism last year. So I'm on a totally different side of this. I mean, professionally, I'm still very, very interested, but of course, personally now I have a very vested interest in transitions with my grandson, making sure that he gets the services that he needs so that he can have a successful outcome as well. So I'm really looking forward to this. You know, I'm looking forward to learning even more about transitions. I've enjoyed the series that we've had so far. I've learned a lot, especially about the evaluation and all of that process that goes into making those decisions. So I'm just here to learn more, lifelong learner, and that's important, I think, to keep learning.
Welcome.
Always something else to learn.
Appreciate
Thank you.
your attitude.
And Gary can feel your pain because I won't let him retire.
Yeah. You know, she keeps poking at me.
You're in our club too, Gary, huh? The failed retiree club.
Yeah. I failed to mention in the failed retirement part that for the past 10 years, I've been doing independent educational evaluation transition assessments, because with the attorneys that I know, once they found out I'd left the university, said, hey, we could use you doing this. So I'm out doing transition assessments for school districts all the time now. So no, I've felt retirement miserably as well.
Okay, Marty, I think you're off mute, waiting patiently.
Can you hear me now?
Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I've been in education for a very long time, just like my cohort. And I started in regular education as a science teacher. Loved doing it. Found out right away that I had some children that needed more than I was able to give them because I didn't have the knowledge. So that's how I got into special ed. I got a special ed degree. We were in Kansas at the time, not in Alabama. And I have loved my time in special ed. In fact, I went to a couple of schools when we came back to Alabama, and I realized that I could do more if I had a little more authority. And so I went back to school. I was a superintendent for 6 years.
Wow.
And I was able to help my teachers learn more about how they could meet the needs, not only of regular ed kids, but also of kids who needed more help. So once I got hooked on special ed, here I am.
Well,
I haven't left it.
so glad.
Good to have you.
That's good.
Thank you. Very blessed to be here.
Pamela, looks like you're coming off of mute.
Yes, I'm Tamala Winston. This is my 23rd year as a special education teacher, and I enjoy transition. I like planning activities and implementing them. I've even done community-based training in that area of going in the community, meeting people and setting up sites for my students. And I also just wanted to participate in the webinar to find out as much as possible I can, or something new, something different. So, you know, I'm always
Wonderful.
looking for things to do with my students.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad we have a teacher as part of the group, because we talked a lot about our presentation and how to reach teachers. So we'd love feedback later if you want. Marion, I have you on my screen next.
Hi, good morning, afternoon. I'm Marion Parker, and I'm sort of in Gary's boat, I think. I will confess, I'm addicted to numbers, and I've never met a database that I didn't love, and I wanted to jump into sideways. And my background is in English education. My PhD is English curriculum and teaching, so I spent my career teaching English, and then at the higher education level, secondary education. But then when I failed retirement, I got picked up to sort of do support staff work, and I write contracts. And the downside of loving numbers is that somebody realizes, wait a minute, I'll bet you'd be good at writing annual performance reports. And so that's kind of, I'm kind of a cleanup utility player, but the more I know about transition, the easier those responses to 3.A.162 on the EBPD, the more facile I am at putting those together. So it's good to be here, and thank you for letting me play.
So I'm going to jump in just for a second because I might contact you after this. One of my grants that I currently have, OSEP has just funded. It's called the Rhonda Weiss Accessibility Center, and it's focused on making those SPP APR data accessible for all people, parents, students, teachers. And so we're holding some stakeholder meetings. You might be interested in being a stakeholder and giving us some feedback.
I would love to participate in that. The
I'll
numbers,
let
they're
you know.
magical numbers. Yeah, they're magical numbers. And, you know, you look at them and you think, gosh, wouldn't it be great if everybody could see this? Yeah,
Right,
I would be
right.
happy
Or
to. Thank you.
It's not even just seeing it, it's understanding it.
Absolutely.
That's really the charge.
Absolutely.
So,
right.
Really interesting grant. Betsy, did we hear from you?
No, I guess I'm next. I am Betsy Stockdale, and special education teacher for a number of years, 38. I like every Vicky and Marty and Marion and Rhonda and everyone else, Donna and Diane, failed retirement. Felt very blessed to be a part of the SPDIG grant starting in 2014. Of course, that grant has ended, and now we're entering a new grant. So I'm just excited. I ended my special ed career at the high school level, and it was there was a lot asked of a high school special ed teacher. Not only did I have to help transition from 9th to 10th grade, the high school where I taught was 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I then had to help students who wanted to go to college prepare for the ACT. I then had to help students who were thinking about going to work, you know, and it was overwhelming. I mean, we ended up dividing the department I was in into, okay, you handle these type students, I'll handle these type students, because if you had, you know, 25 to 30 on your caseload, you know, and they all had different needs, it was that transition piece was really hard to make sure everyone got what they needed to be successful after high school.
And it hasn't gotten any easier. From the teacher's standpoint, the data we've collected, they are really overwhelmed. So your experience will be really good as part of this group. And then we had another Donna added. We heard from one Donna, but we haven't heard from the other Donna.
Hey all, sorry I'm a little bit late.
That's okay.
But
Better late than never.
yeah, well, that's because I'm in transit. I'm actually in Northern Illinois right now with my mother, working remotely. My name is Donna Plussel, and I met most of these ladies actually through the previous SPDIG grant as a consultant and trainer for co-teaching, co-planning, and coaching. So when the opportunity came from the State Department to join in on this transition professional development, it's something that I thought, oh, I really would like to do that. My role right now is I am the interim dean for the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Montevallo.
Oh, cool.
In Central Alabama. Special educator by training, special education professor at the university, and looking for a colleague who actually specializes in transition, as I'm more of an elementary person, but that's kind of how I'm connected.
Can somebody tell me what the acronym SPDIG stands for?
State Personnel Development Grant.
Got it. Thank you.
It's,
Through
it's
us
on,
out.
it's on the title, Gary. I spelled it out on the title.
Oh, all right.
So just so you know.
My ADD-ness on that one.
Well, we're not on the title slide now, so.
Okay.
This is just really, really interesting that we have so many people here with vast experience. I'm excited about that. And as we go, just my housekeeping, as we go through today, I really like this idea of more of a roundtable and being able to present and discuss at the same time. So I have my chat open on the right side. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat. Gary and I would rather, this is 4 hours. So Gary and I would rather be able to discuss it in the moment, just in time services, right? Then wait till the end and potentially maybe have you forget, or we've gone over so much stuff that it's just too overwhelming. The other thing is we are all adults in this room. If you need, it's 4 hours. If you need a break and it's not the scheduled break time, please feel free to go take your break if you need one. Don't feel like you have to not use the restroom or go get a drink of water, or in my case, I'm an all-day coffee drinker. Please feel free to go. We will have our plan today, as you'll see as we move into the agenda. This is going to be interactive, but not overwhelmingly interactive. I've been on a few of those. So with that, we will get started. This is our agenda for today. We just did the welcome. I am going to take a few minutes to overview the taxonomy for transition programming and help link what those evidence-based practices say with why we're here today talking about CLD. We have worked with your team to get permission to have you take our national survey that we have been giving for a while now on the CLD practices. We'll tell you more in a few minutes. Then we're going to move into the best practice area, talk about personal values, and hopefully give you some really usable strategies to use as you leave. That's our heart, is that we want to be able to give you usable information. So it's not just academic knowledge. Yes, Gary?
All I'm seeing is the people's faces, but not the slides that you're putting up. What am I doing wrong?
Is that everybody?
Yeah, we don't see a screen.
I'm so sorry. I probably at some point there stopped sharing so I could see you. There you go.
There we
You seeing
go.
it now?
Yep. Thank you.
Yay!
I remember myself in elementary school being like that, but and the teacher would say, well, thank you. You're the only one who would speak up, you know?
Oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, so we're good.
So we have 2 recommended references for today, and I don't know if they went out, Rhonda. We'd sent our resources, I believe, last week. If not, we'll figure out a way for you to access them.
And I can put them in the chat room
That
if
would be
that's okay. I know I sent them to the State Department, but they put it in the Power School platform.
Okay.
So Tamala will probably be able to access the materials via that, but the rest of us retirees would need that emailed to them. So I'll send that.
Okay, that would be wonderful. So the first resource is the Taxonomy for Transition Programming 2.0, and that just houses all the best of the research that we know. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then Gary wrote the book, the only book, on transition planning for culturally and linguistically diverse youth. We aren't putting the book in the chat box though. That is something you would have to go get. But just know that a lot of what you're hearing today has originally been spoken about in the book, but then it's been updated since that time. Gary and I have just combed the research to keep everything updated. Our objectives today, we just have 3. One is that you will increase your knowledge of the evidence-based practices found in the taxonomy. that you will increase your knowledge of the research for transition of culturally, linguistically diverse youth with disabilities, and that you'll increase your knowledge around those best practices that you can use for transition with culturally and linguistically diverse youth. So you all may know some of this, and I feel like introducing the taxonomy, you've probably heard it since we're the last one in the series, you probably heard about it, but I'm not sure you will have heard what I'm going to share today. So this is a little bit of the rest of my story. When I was a doctoral candidate, I had the very good fortune to be invited by Dr. Paula Kohler to join her team as the first National Technical Assistance Center on Transition was kicking off. At that time, it was called NSTAC, not NTAC. It's NTAC-C now. It's on its third round of funding. But you could have knocked me over with a feather to have that invitation. That was amazing. I had 8 or 9 years working directly with Paula Kohler before she retired. She's now retired, and she did not fail her retirement. Oh. Just so you know. Dr. Paula Kohler is in an RV right now, and I think she's headed to Taos. So to do some fly fishing. She's taking her retirement pretty seriously. So this is a little bit of the history of the taxonomy, where it was and where it is now. So historically, which some of you might remember, Paula Kohler was at the University of Illinois, and she led a team to conduct research that had never been conducted before. The field had never been defined before, and the word transition was never used before, but they were interested in finding out what are the best practices to assist students to transition from school to work. At that time, there were school to work development grants out by the U.S. Department of Ed. And so some of that research was funded by that. And certainly some of the research knowledge came out of that. So with her, she had quite a vast team. There's a lot of other names in there that you would recognize as well. They conducted 4 major studies to develop the taxonomy. I'm not going to go deep into those, but the first one was the basic research analysis. Then they went across the country and looked at exemplary programs. So what are those programs doing to ensure that the students succeed as they transition into adult life? They did a model project analysis. So looking at those school to work projects, they looked at that model and they did an analysis of all the funded projects from the U.S. Department of Ed in that area. And then they did this 3-phase structured conceptualization process. At that time, there was not a lot in the literature around research-based practices in general. We didn't really have the evidence-based practice terminology, but these authors, Peter and Heron, had criteria for evaluating best practices. So they adopted that, and then they went to the field. So that is how the original taxonomy was developed. During my time with Paula, between 2012 and 2016, the question came up, a couple questions came up. Is the taxonomy, I'm going to flip back slides again, that was developed in 1996. Hello, that's a long time ago. It was developed in 1996. We were using it with NSTAC, had moved into NTAC, and the question was, is it still relevant? Are these practices still valid and reliable? And what else have we learned since 1996? So our NSTAC team, along with some other invited people from different areas and different centers, all came together. We evaluated hundreds and hundreds of studies. You should see our Dropbox. We have Dropbox folders with all of this that I still have. So we went out and looked at all of those, and I was so excited. I kind of led the team through this process. I was so excited. The entire 1996 taxonomy and all the practices were revalidated. Every single one of them. Plus, of course, we had a lot to add. But nothing came off the table. They were all still really relevant. I have a list here of some of the collaborators that played a really important role. You may recognize some of them. One is the Cedar Center out of Florida, who you may be working with your SPDIG, or the State Department may be working with. They are making all those innovation configurations for pre-service and in-service teachers. We also worked with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the Institute of Educational Sciences, who developed the What Works Clearinghouse and housed it. We looked at in the journals, and specifically we wanted to add vocational rehabilitation to the taxonomy. It was not there before, it was all school. So now it includes the adult service end, the National Center for Educational Evaluation and Regional Assistance, the National Dropout Prevention Center, and the National Dropout Prevention Center for Students with Disabilities. Those are actually two different entities. The National School Climate Center, that has all the valuable information in the Chicago area, and then of course our NSTAC and TAC. The whole entire process was research-based. This is what came out of it in the 30,000 foot view. So what you either have in the chat, you have more of the granular view, but this is the 30,000 foot view. All 5 categories that were in the original taxonomy remained. However, we heard from parents and parent centers that family involvement did not mean the same thing as family engagement. So we made the decision to reword family involvement to family engagement so that we could encompass that, that feeling of parents as equal partners. And then I have little red checks, which I should have in black to be fully accessible. So that has a checkbox next to it. In student development, we added a lot in the academic skill area. We added a lot in the life, social, and emotional skill area. And we added a lot in the instructional context. And then under program structures, we added quite a bit around program characteristics. And then school climate is a new area. That was newly developed since 1996. So that has its own category with its own components in it. So that's why that looks like that. I have sent you a copy of the taxonomy so you can look through it. Please, I am second author on that. Paula Kohler is first, I'm second author. I kind of own all the Q&A now since she's decided to go into RV life. If you have any questions on anything in there, do not hesitate to reach out to me. My email is in this presentation, and probably my cell phone number, you can text me too. But I'd be glad to talk about that. Now, whoops. Oh, I already said some of this. All the practices from the original study was revalidated, and the areas remain consistent except for that change in language to family engagement. And the 2 practices, I cannot do a presentation without saying this to you all. I say it in every presentation any way I can. The 2 that have the largest effect size. So if you love numbers and data, you understand effect size. If you don't, effect size means that, okay, this practice might be something that we know works. This is the one that works with the most amount of students, the most amount of the time. So that's my very easy to understand what is effect size. The 2 with the highest are teaching those students self-determination skills and making sure that they have paid employment prior to exiting high school. Employment experience is important, but paid employment prior to exiting high school is what we've really seen makes the huge difference. All of it makes a difference, so don't ignore your other things. But getting a paycheck, it just does something to a person. That's my hypothesis. Once you have received your own paycheck, you want to keep receiving your own paycheck. So that's my spiel. This you might not have seen in any other presentation. When we completed our work with the tax updates to the taxonomy, it was about the time that the IDEA data center were having these national work with the states, and had several presentations across the country, and OSEP went to those, and we were all of the centers helped with those. And when we finished, OSEP said, okay, but we want to know not just what works for age 16 and up. We want you to find out what works from birth to adult. And adult cut off at 24. That was a decision the group made. And so what we did is we a lot of it was I gathered experts in the different areas of special education and vocational rehabilitation, and came to the table, and this is just my scenario, this took 2 years to do, came to the table, and we put all of our best research and evidence-based practices on the table and did a huge sort. And what came out, well, what was interesting was we did not plan to use the taxonomy at all. Like the practices, yes, but not the taxonomy. But when everything came to the surface, those 5 areas of the taxonomy is where everything sat. It was really interesting. And we were able to identify 14 practices that continue from birth to age 24. And this is a huge piece of work, and it is an incredible amount of knowledge to have in your back pocket if you're serving the whole, the whole spectrum. So you have a copy of this. It's a nice one-pager just like this. It's very concise, but you can see it moves from early intervention of birth to 2 to post-school adult, and the federal mandates are on that kind of sort of the middle 2/3 line. Then we had a section of the significant outcomes from the research in those different areas. And then at the very bottom was the known predictors. What really kept coming out, and we're talking about effect size again, is the practice with the highest effect size was CLD. It was culturally relevant programs and practices. And so this is why Gary and I have re-engaged in this work and really tried to start understanding what it looks like now. We've had a lot of changes in our country, you know that. We've had a lot of changes in the political climate. We've had a lot of changes in attitudes and even our approaches to education. So what we're sharing with you today is what we know right at the moment, like the best of what we know at the moment around the idea of culturally and linguistically diverse programs and practices. I have not been good and watched chat. I've been talking too much. I'm gonna open the chat real quick before we move to the next step. Oh, well, we have 5 things because you put the documents up, so no questions yet. Again, don't hesitate to ask the questions. All right, so our next thing that we'd like you to do, and we really would like you to do this if you're willing. So Gary and I created a survey, and we started giving this survey in 2008, Gary Greene.
Jeez.
2008, we started giving this survey around the country of the only practices that have been identified as research-based practices, meaning they have enough evidence behind them to be named a research-based practice in the area of CLD youth and their families. So you will see family questions too, not just youth questions. Because one of the things we know is with CLD youth, we need to engage their families, or we're going to miss the boat. So we started with our first iteration in 2008 in Utah, and we pretty much gathered data from the whole entire state of Utah because we had every school district represented. And we decided, boy, we really want to take that. We had great information. We gave the State Department, they catered to that information. And starting in about 2012, we decided we want a really representative sample. So yeah, Utah, we have that, but we really want to expand out and we want to get representation across the country. So we kind of started our, I'm going to call it a dog and pony show, Gary, with CLD around 2012, gathering data, everything we went to that we could around the country. And then we analyzed all that data in 2019. We published an article. That is one of the documents that's in the chat, is that article that we published in CDTEI with the results at that time. What Gary and I know is that COVID has impacted CLD youth in transition more than any other population. So, and I really mean probably any other population. And so we're really interested now in hearing about what practices are happening, what kind of barriers you're seeing, what kind of great practices you're seeing post-COVID. So keep that in mind as you move to the survey. But we created the survey with your state, and I think I have another slide about it. It will be mostly anonymous, except we're a small group. We're not asking for your name, but we are asking for your role and the school district or districts or region, and some of you, it might be the state that you represent, so that when the team gets this data back, it can help them in their planning. We won't be sharing that publicly, but we will be sharing it with the state team. It will not have your name on it. And maybe, Rhonda, you'll want to give it further than just the group here, which you're welcome to do. So when you look at these 19 practices, you're going to rate them on this scale. 1, this practice is not occurring. Like, it's not even in our mind. It's not on our agendas. It's not occurring at all. A 2 means you are developing it. So you've recognized this practice, but it's not occurring in practice yet. But you've recognized it and it's something you're working on. A 3 is this practice is occurring some of the time. So some of the students, some of the parents, some of the schools. A 4 would be, you got this. You've nailed it. This practice is occurring regularly, widely, and consistently. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I unmuted myself because I'm looking at the participants, and I know I will likely not be able to respond because I'm not out in the field. I'm SPDIG support for the transition.
We ask everybody to respond.
Did you? Okay.
We would like everybody to respond, and then what becomes important is your role.
Okay. Okay.
So you will self-identify your role, and then that will help make, the kind of decisions. But we know you've seen things too.
Correct. Right.
So,
I just know we've got, a variety of retirees in here that some will have had experience with, and some may not have had much experience with transition. But just a heads up, I was worried if you wanted.
The best that you can, be
Okay.
as transparent as you can and honest as you can. We would like everybody to go ahead and answer the survey.
No problem.
And then there's a section, I think, on each page that asks you for, do you have any explanation for this? Feel free to add that in there. And when we get done, we're going to give you 15 minutes to do this. You can go off camera or whatever. When we get done, Gary's going to give you some information from what we found out from all the other states and sites that we gathered information. I will put this link in the chat box. Again, you have 15 minutes. I'll set the timer and it'll be anonymous to your identity, but please tell us who you're responding about, whether it's a school, individual school, it's a district, it's a region, or if it's the whole state. And Gary and I will be around, so if you have questions as you go, feel free. It's in Qualtrics. We have done a test run. I think it'll work for everybody, but let me know if you have technical difficulties. All right, I'm going to set my 15-minute timer. And it says it takes 10 minutes to take, but I wanted to give you plenty of time. All right. Feel free to turn off your camera if you want to while you're doing this, mute, whatever you need. There we go. All right. There we go, Gary.
Okay. Well, thank you for participating and taking this survey. I was just reviewing. I did a review of having done this survey. We gave this survey originally to within the states of Illinois, Georgia, Michigan, Northern Mariana Island, Oregon, and Utah. And so now you have you also have a copy of the article that we did in our to summarize the thing. I'm just holding up a picture of it here, but it was published in the Journal of what was this journal? I'm trying to remember because it was a while back.
It was CDTEI.
Oh, okay. The Career Development and Transition for Exceptional Individuals, which is our professional organization's journal. And so we've given you a copy of the article so that if you want to get into the weeds, so to speak, you can read the article. But this is probably the key piece that's in the article. This shows you a summary of what data we got from people who took the survey in all of those states. And M on the in the top there is the mean on that 1 to 4 scale that you see on the top right corner. So everything from this practice isn't occurring to this practice occurs regularly, widely, and consistently in our school district. And so I guess one of the things that June and I were commenting on when we were putting this presentation together is if you found that you didn't have very many practices that you rated up into the 4 range or the 3 or 4 range, you're not alone. Okay. We found when we originally did this research that practices that are taken into consideration cultural and linguistic diversity for kids who are in transition are not practiced very regularly in school districts. And so if you look down the column for the mean on all these items, you can see that the highest mean that even occurred was 2.29, which is like right in the middle, meaning we use non-family members as interpreters. And then the next highest was, well, parents are active partners at transition planning meetings. That's relatively high, but not even into the 3 range. Okay. And we provide our school we provide our school personnel with cultural competence training. That's what you're going through right now. You're getting cultural competence training, but you can see that this practice is practically not occurring across the country in terms of what you're experiencing now. So hats off to Rona for putting this together, because very few school districts engage in the type of training that we're doing with you today. And school personnel use person-centered planning tools for transition planning with students. That's also pretty low. Person-centered planning means is that we're emphasizing what the person is interested in doing, as opposed to the school district saying, oh, we have this available for you, or we have this available for you, and these are the programs that we'd like you to consider, as opposed to asking the person, what would you like to do, and then trying to design a transition program that matches their interest and need. So we'll gather the data from your survey and get it back to you so you can see. But unfortunately, we're not finding that these practices are occurring regularly, or fortunately, because they're not occurring regularly, June and I still get this dog and pony show opportunity to be done. You can look at it either way. Okay, so let's go to the next slide.
So I was just going to say, I hadn't thought about it until you were going in to take the survey. If you want to, as a state and as participants, have other people take this survey around the state over the next 2 weeks, I'll hold it open for the next 2 weeks so you can maybe get a broader view of what's happening in your state. So same link, the link that's in chat, I can email it to you too. Glad to hold it open so that you can do that.
Question that I have though, June, is all that will be a result of the survey is the raw data of people's responses, not the analysis, i.e. the means of what people did who take the survey. Is that correct?
That's why your friend June can run that.
Oh, well, I didn't really make a new job for you, but there you go, Rona. If you get the state who take it, send the data to June and she'll create a table for you like this that tells you what your state responses are. That's very, very generous of you, June.
So before we move into Gary sharing all of the great answers to these issues, do you have any thoughts you want to share with the survey? Did anything surprise you? These are the only research-based practices for transition age youth with disabilities and their families who are culturally, linguistically diverse. Anything surprise you? Anything frustrate you? We have a small group, so I if you would like to respond. Is it good to know you're not alone?
I think your position too makes a difference, because some of the questions for me, when you're talking about diverse individuals, you know what I'm saying? I responded probably higher than I should have, but I know at the State Department, they have to take in account diversity. So.
Okay. All right, Gary. Go.
All right, so we're going to get into the meat of the presentation now and talk about cultural linguistic diversity and the role it plays in transition. And I thought we'd begin by just exploring the concept or operationalizing what we mean by culture. So let's go to the next slide. So the culture is used to describe learned behavior and how that behavior and the components of that behavior are transmitted by members of a particular society or cultural group. And examples of that include shared language, set of values, traditions, and worldview. So it's not just all about heroes, holidays, and food. And I bring this up because when I was an elementary school teacher, it was like, oh, okay, well, it's Black History Week this week, so we're gonna do something that's related to African Americans, or it's Gary, would you come in and do a little talk on Hanukkah for the kids? Because it's Hanukkah time of the year. Would you bring some latkes too? And share that with it. And that was like the total exposure that kids might get in school to what my culture is. So let's go back to the previous slide, June, and let me give you an examples within my own culture of a greater breadth and depth of my culture. So my culture is I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish by birth. Both my parents are Jewish. My lineage comes from Eastern Europe, and there's a long history of persecution of Jewish people, and including my grandfather, who had to leave Russia and the Eastern European area during the pogroms in Russia, where they were, if you ever saw Fiddler on the Roof, that's kind of my grandfather's story, where they were pushing them out of their villages and making them leave and go west. And eventually they came here to the United States. And so, there's a certain shared language. Although Jews came from all over different places in the world, one shared language that is pretty much, it's almost not used anymore in the Jewish culture, is Yiddish. Yiddish is a language that emerged over time, and no matter what country a person was from, they could speak to each other in Yiddish. But probably the most shared language in the Jewish culture is going to be Hebrew. And so if you open up our what is our Bible, or the Torah, the scroll, you're going to see everything written in Hebrew. And most Jewish children, if their parents are at all religious, are going to go through a special ceremony at age 13 called a bar or bat mitzvah, when they are then allowed to be official members of the synagogue. And they have to learn a certain amount of Hebrew, and they have to speak a certain amount of Hebrew and chant that. And so that's part of our values and traditions, is that you raise a Jewish child to the point where at age 13, they become a member of the adult community. And then we have a lot of different traditions. In fact, if you go back to watching the movie, or have ever seen the play of Fiddler on the Roof, the very first thing that Tevye sings in that show is tradition. He sings that. And he talks about traditions that have been in Judaism for a very, very long time. And then we have a worldview, and most of our worldview and our traditions are very much, rooted in what's in the Ten Commandments. And, if my rabbi has even said, if you never did anything in your life that was Jewish, but you observed the Ten Commandments, you're Jewish. That's basically being a good, righteous Jewish person. So I'm not going to go into more and more, but what I'm telling you is that when we define culture, we're talking more than just the heroes that we have in our culture. We have heroes in Judaism. We have, we have Judah and the Maccabees, who fought that led to the temple being restored. That's part of Hanukkah. We have holidays. We have Hanukkah. We have Passover. We have different holidays. And with those different holidays, there's foods associated with it. But if that's all you know about the Jewish culture, you really don't know the Jewish culture very well. You don't know it much in any depth. Now, each of you also probably have a cultural background, cultural values, traditions. And we can go to back to the next slide. So, each of us have that. Some of us, for example, my late wife, who I asked her, what's your background? And she said, well, I'm Heinz 57 variety. She said, I don't have one in particular culture. My family is diverse from all kinds of different places, and that's fine. So now when we talk about what is cultural and linguistic diversity, what we're saying is that within the people who you are interacting with in society, and in particularly in schools, we're talking about families and individuals who are from backgrounds that are different from the mainstream American, Anglo-Saxon, white Christian, English-speaking people who emigrated to this country from England during colonial times and really make up the majority of American society. Which is not to say that if you are American, Anglo-Saxon, white Christian and emigrated from England during colonial times, that you shouldn't be proud and identify with that culture. That's fine. I think the challenge that we have is that when you're dealing with families who are from cultures different from what's on the screen here, you have to be aware of what the more that you're aware of the subtleties and aspects of their culture, the better off you are going to be in terms of helping those families and their children plan for the future. And we're also in a difficult time in this country right now. We're in a difficult time because there's a lot of tension going on about whether or not white replacement is happening, and that these other cultures are trying to replace us, the us being these folks that are on the screen, and push back from that. And so it's a difficult time to be of a culture that's different from this, but every culture is important. The one that's on the screen, your culture, my culture, and other people's culture. And what this presentation is all about is when you're going to do transition planning for a family that's of a different culture or any culture, what do you need to keep in mind and be sensitive to in order to make that interaction with those folks productive? All right, let's go to the next slide. So misconceptions of cultural and linguistic diversity is strictly focusing on racial and ethnic differences. In other words, well, this person is African American, or this person is Latino and they have brown skin, or this person is Native American and they have reddish brown skin, or this person is this or that, as opposed to looking at culture in a greater depth, such as the things that I've just told you. What are the languages that they speak? What are their behaviors? What are their values? Now, you don't necessarily have the time to go into all of those things for every different culture that might exist in students in your schools. But if you're sensitive to the fact that those aspects of that family and that child are things that you need to be aware of when you do transition planning, you will be leading to what in my book we called more skilled dialogue with those families, or greater cultural competence on your own part. And I think that's kind of one of the things in mind that probably Rona had in mind in doing this training today. And that's one of our outcomes that we hope that occurs as a result. So let's go to the next slide. So these are different levels of culture that I've already talked about. Different cultures have different languages. Different cultures have different values. Different cultures have different beliefs, behaviors, generational status, gender, socioeconomic status. Some cultures have similarities with respect to that. Let me just take generational status, for example, number 5. In certain cultures, the eldest of the family, the elders, are held in very, very high regard. And you as a child from that culture, it's not okay for you to go against the values or the desires of the elders in your tribe or in your family or whatever. That parents hold very high respect in certain cultures, and for you to go into an IEP meeting and say to the student, well, what is it that you want to do with your life, without ever having asked the parents what they want their child to do with their life, that's not a good thing to do. If you're not aware of that, that's within that culture. Let's talk about values. In my culture, in Judaism, most Jews want their kids to go to college and become a professional. So if you were to say to a Jewish person in an IEP meeting in transition, well, what can we do? Even a person with a disability. Well, what can we do to get you a job? Because you're not probably going to be very, very college bound. You don't have the ability to go on to college. That's probably not the best thing to say going into a transition planning meeting with parents from a Jewish cultural background. or socioeconomic status. If you disrespect a family because they're from a poor community and their socioeconomic status is not very strong, I'm not saying that you would do that, but any professionals that would ever show disrespect for parents from a socioeconomic status that's different from, being high end. These are levels that you need to be aware of when you're interacting with a family. Now, I want to say something here. I'm probably and hopefully preaching to the choir, meaning to all of you. You probably know all of these things, but when we do the research, on these aspects, and you saw that chart that we just presented, in general, these practices are not being regularly used by educators when they interact with families who are culturally and linguistically diverse. All right, let's go to the next slide. So remember, cultural diversity, it's not a static quality. Doesn't mean, oh, because that person's African American, they're culturally diverse. You don't know anything at all about that African American family. That African American family could be super highly educated. I have an African American cousin, because my family happened to be diverse, who was the chancellor at UCLA. And so just seeing him on the street, walking around and seeing because he's Black and assuming that he's uneducated, not a static quality, okay? Can't be reliably determined by ethnicity alone. You've got to know much greater depth about persons and families than just how they look or how they speak or how they dress or how they act. And it should not be looked at as a risk factor. Because somebody's culturally diverse, we shouldn't be thinking, oh, all right, well, we're going to have to do something different for this particular family because they're Mexican. That kind of statement might be made, or they might be just recent immigrants and they're just here to get government benefits, and so we don't need to do very much for this family. Those are examples, not good examples, but those are examples of what these bullet points on this slide could be showing you. Okay.
And I'd like to add in here, Gary, that when Gary and I go to the literature and try to dig out the research, it is very frustrating because this cultural diversity piece is over and over referred to as a risk factor. So I feel like we need to do better when we're talking about likelihood for graduation or just some of those things, because the way that the literature says it, and sometimes in our reporting, for those of you that are doing reporting for this SPDIG or SPPAPR, we list all these things as risk factors. Okay.
All right, let's continue. So cultural diversity is defined and characterized by the interactions and comparisons between people within a given environment, not by trait or characteristics within a given individual. So that means when a person who speaks Spanish and their child walk into the room with you, what cultural diversity is going to be all about is how you choose to interact with them and that family, as opposed to the fact that just saying, oh, they're Hispanic, so I need to do this, or they're African American, so I need to do that. No, there are no hard and fast rules of what you need to do with anybody from any cultural background, be it Anglo, be it Hispanic, be it Asian, whatever. It's all about how you interact within the environment that you're working in, and the interactions that you have, and how you approach those interactions. That's going to make you more capable of dealing with cultural diversity, or in my book, we refer to it as skilled dialogue. So, and this is a good time, because what skilled dialogue does is it allows you to promote comfortable interactions between whoever you are and someone from a different culture, so that everybody within that interaction feels safe and comfortable. And so this is what we want to get across to you, and for you to get across to others that you're going to be training, to individuals and families when you work with them, so that everybody in the room or any student you work with who's of a cultural and linguistically diverse background feels comfortable and safe, I guess would be the way to say it. So cultural shock is when it's the opposite of that. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel safe in the room. They don't feel respected. They don't feel empathized with, if you will. So I believe there's an activity that comes next, isn't it, June, the next slide?
Yeah, do you want to share these two questions?
Yeah. So take a moment. And are we going to have this just?
I think it's on the next slide too.
Okay, we're not going to have them write this down. We're going to have them. Yeah, we're going to do a breakout session, and you're going to assign them. Is that how that's going to work?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to do a little breakout session where you have an opportunity to talk about your culture a bit, who you are, what is your culture, and every one of us has a culture, whatever that culture might be, and what are the defining characteristics of your culture and the breadth and depth and levels within you, your culture, family, and home. I kind of, illustrated that by talking about my culture. We'd like you to do something similar. And what's the time frame on this, June?
We're going to have rooms of 3 to 4 of you per room, and I'm just doing a random assignment. And I think if we take about 7 to 8 minutes, you can each share some things about your culture. Of course, you could probably talk all day, right? About your individual culture, but I will take 7 to 8 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning before it zips you back, and be ready to come back and kind of share your ahas about what you learn about each other. And you might be in a room with somebody and you might not, because I'm doing it random. All right, so I'm going to open the rooms. And you should get an invitation to join. And Gary, you're just hanging out with me. There we go, resume recording. Okay, so CLD outcomes compared to white, CLD youth with disabilities have poor post-school outcomes. This was especially shown in the National Longitudinal Transition Study 2. The National Longitudinal Transition Study 2013 did not collect post-school data. They only collected in-school data. So that is, when you talk about empirical research, that is kind of the last really big empirical research that we have. And unfortunately, it's probably really outdated. I believe their last data collection window was around 2010, 2011. So we're getting close to a decade away from that. But what that study showed is that CLD youth with disabilities, they lag behind in every area: employment, education, independence, and engagement. So some more recent statistics show that in 2022, the prevalence of disability continued to be higher for Blacks and whites than for Hispanics and Asians. This is a shift. I cannot tell you why this is. This is just what the US Department of Labor Bureau of Statistics has found. So the incidence of disability is higher for Blacks and whites than Hispanics and Asians. Does not mean they have better outcomes. It's just they're identified at higher rates. The NLTS2 data indicated that low SES African American and Hispanic youth with disabilities had lower rates of high school graduation and college enrollment compared to whites. So on the employment side, and these are again our 2022 statistics, the employment rates were higher for whites with disabilities. It was 21.9% compared to Asians, which was 17.8%, and Blacks, which was 18% for persons with disabilities. Again, this is a little bit of a shift because the last set of data they collected on this, whites and Asians were together, kind of in the plus side. And so what this really shows is that we need to start paying attention. This is my hypothesis, this is not in the research. This may be due to the Asian hate that's going on right now. You know, our country has not been nice since COVID started. So unemployment rates were lower for whites with a disability compared to Hispanics and Blacks with persons with disabilities. One thing to know is these rates are actually better than they were the last time I gave this presentation, which was a couple of years ago. So employment rates are higher and unemployment are lower overall for persons with disabilities. However, they are projecting that they're just projecting dismal outcomes, right? When you start listening to all the news, I hate listening to the news, but they're projecting this is going to change dramatically in the next 2 years.
June, I have a question about this
Yes.
slide.
Yes.
So if we look at the first bullet point, we notice that employment rates are pretty dismal for whites, Blacks, and African Americans with disabilities. I mean, just take the whites with a disability. We rounded that out. I mean, roughly 80% of whites with a disability are not employed is how we would
interpret. Right. Well, except unemployment's measured different than employment.
That's what I was going to ask, because those don't match up. But the point is that having a disability still in the year 2022 is a really a dismal prediction of employment. Disability still stands in the way pretty highly of your being able to gain employment across all of those populations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I looked back a decade ago, the employment rates for whites with a disability was 17.7. So this is a slight increase, but it's still, we still have lots of work left to do. And I'm so glad you all are here helping do that work.
Yeah. And I just want to add that, you know, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and addressing these aspects of transition for youth with disabilities has been in law for quite a long time now, and we don't seem to be making significant gains in the areas of employment, and it's disappointing.
Since Gary's bringing this up, if you want to know a pain point for me is that the reauthorization process for IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has been basically ignored, and it was scheduled to be reauthorized in Obama's first administration. So that's how far out we are from reauthorizing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so we're sitting with an IDEA that was created in 2004. You think things have changed a little bit and we need to pay attention?
Yeah.
And if nothing else, it would be really nice to line up pre-ets from the Rehab Act with IDEA, but they don't line up and they don't always agree, which produces some sticky situations sometimes, which you all may know. Anyway, I don't know how to fix that. All right, so our conclusion is that CLD status appears to present additional obstacles to successful transition to quality adult life and beyond just disability alone. With that thought, we are going to let you go on a 10-minute break. You can have cameras off, you can take your earphones out, do whatever you need to do, make some more coffee, which I'm going to go do, and we will see you back at, let me see what time it is. How about we see you back at 3:15? That's actually a 13-minute break. And I think we're doing good on time.
Yep,
Sounds
it is
good.
2:15 our time, so.
2:15, sorry. And it's totally different for
For
Gary. 'cause
Gary's got a
he's
different time.
Okay, so
Yeah, that's all
2:15,
right.
we will see you back.
I'll see you in 15 minutes.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. Okay. Here we go. It's all yours, Gary.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice break. We're going to talk a little bit now about, what I found and June has found. If you peruse the literature about parents from and families who are culturally and linguistically diverse, a lot of this information came from interviews and what do you call it? Parent interview sessions where they were asked open-ended questions about what their experiences were with the schools with transition and or special education. And so I'm going to tell you what these findings are, and I will try to give you an example of it in the school context, so you can see what it would really feel like for a parent who is a CLD background. So research shows that educators may have a limited understanding of CLD culture, or they'll view it as a liability. Viewing it as a liability is saying something like, okay, I can actually remember this being said when I was an elementary school teacher, and one of my special ed students who was Mexican American, his parents didn't come to back to school night. And other teachers said, well, Mexicans, they don't really care about education anyway. Okay. Yeah, Ron, I see you make a face like that, but that was actually said out of the mouth of one of the teachers in my school. Well, that's an example of having a limited view of Mexican Americans, or viewing Mexican American being a liability. This school I taught in Irvine was in an agricultural area. And so a lot of the families that we had were families where their parents worked in the fields or whatever. And so, this is a white Anglo teacher who made that statement, and it was very disrespectful. And that's a second example of the bullet there: lack of respect for CLD families and their children. Oh, he's not going to go to college anyway. He's just a Mexican kid, or they don't even acknowledge that CLD families have hopes and dreams for their child's future. That whatever that hope and dream might be. And by the way, I'm not pointing to any of you. I'm just giving you examples from my experience of having been a special educator for 10 years. That it might be that a CLD family does want their child to go to college, or does want their child to get employed outside of the fields in the agricultural industry in California and have a better job and a better future. But, you just make an assumption because that's what the family has been doing for years and years and years, that they maybe don't have a hope and that type of dream for the future. So if you or if educators are coming into interactions with families with these kinds of attitudes or beliefs, it's going to handicap the transition planning conference. And again, I'm not making this stuff up. This is coming from the literature when they interviewed parents. Okay, so that's why it's on the slide. The research actually showed that. Let's go to the next slide. Also, research shows that families may struggle with immigration issues or lack language proficiency. So let's take those first two bullets, all right? If a parent is in the country and they don't have legal status to be in this country, they are not going to speak up in an IEP meeting to do anything that is going to be controversial or possibly get them in trouble because because of fear of being deported. So they may not participate in a transition planning meeting to the same degree as somebody else. They might say, whatever you think's best for my child, I'll go with that, you know, or they may lack the language proficiency to even understand what's going on in the meeting. I give an example of that in my book with Asian families in San Francisco. First of all, Asian families, education is very important to their children. They value education very highly. They also have a high degree of respect for professionals, particularly school personnel. And so if they lack language proficiency and you're in a transition planning meeting with them and you're asking the family or you're making recommendations to the family of what might be what you think is best for their Asian child, they might sit and nod and show respect to you, but that doesn't mean they necessarily internally agree with you. They're just showing respect and deference to school personnel because that's really important in their culture. Well, you need to understand that when you're interacting with an Asian family, particularly an Asian family that doesn't have the language proficiency. So a better way to do that would be to have an interpreter there who can speak the language of the parent, be it Chinese, and say, you know, the school wants to know what your particular preference is for your son or child for the future, what you'd like to see him do, because your son or daughter has said, this is what they'd like to do. Do you agree with that? Or do you have a different point of view? So that you're showing deference and respect to the family, as opposed to just saying, well, self-determination says that the child should determine what he or she wants to do. Well, that's not always the case in all families, in all cultures. In some families and cultures, the kids don't speak up for themselves of what they want themselves to do. It's the parents who speak up and say what they want to do. And if you're not aware of that aspect of that culture, you could make a mistake in a transition planning meeting and the parents leave very dissatisfied, but you would never know it because A, they didn't express that to you, and B, you didn't mediate that whole interaction. So there are nuances when dealing with cultural and linguistically diverse families in the transition planning process that are different than the mainstream American white culture or Anglo culture, where we're supposed to advocate for ourselves and we're supposed to speak up for ourselves, as the law says, with self-determination. And so I think I've also demonstrated, thirdly, that there's different attitudes and norms and family values for their child to transition with disabilities. There are some families that are still not comfortable having their child with a disability being out in society. They're uncomfortable with that. They may feel that that reflects poorly on the family or it's an embarrassment for the family. I don't think that that's going to be extremely common, but need to just be aware of that. Just be aware of that having a child with a disability can be stigmatizing to families or they've experienced negative attitudes towards their child with a disability. I mean, such things as, well, why should they get to go to the front of the line because they're in a wheelchair at Disneyland? You know, my kid has to wait in regular line, you know, so that's just another extreme example. Now we're on to the next slide for more barriers that can happen. Research shows that families who are of culturally and linguistically diverse background, they don't really understand the legal requirements for transition and special education law, especially if they've recently immigrated to the country. They may not know what our laws are, or they experience stereotypes or bias from school professionals. I have an example of that in my book where you know, an administrator, and this is an extreme example, but I wrote case studies in my book where an administrator assumes that because a family is African American, that they wouldn't necessarily want their child to be in this type of job or that type of job. They'd want them to be in a certain type of job that's more comfortable for African Americans. Another bullet there is dealing with generational conflict. For example, in generational conflict, usually what's happening is that the older generation in certain cultures is there to be respected and to be given deference to. And so you would first work with, if there's a future part of transition planning that you're going to talk about education, employment, or living, you would start with what the parents want for the child, as opposed to starting with what the child wants for themselves. And so there are certain cultures where if you wind up getting into that kind of a situation where the child speaks up and says this is what they want to do, but you haven't really checked with the parents to see what the parents want to do, you can get in a generational conflict where the student in an IEP meeting gets kind of treated negatively by their parents because they didn't consider what the parent wants them to do. And so there's an example of that in one of the case studies in my book.
Rhonda, did you have something, you went off mute? Did you have something you wanted to add?
I was going to say along those same lines, Gary, Donna and I were talking when we were supposed to be, comparing our cultural backgrounds, but we were talking about having, like a student or a teacher say, well, we want them to live independently. And, the Asian culture goes, no, they will always be at home with us. We'll take care of them.
Right.
So you're right, knowing.
And then they'll take care of us.
Yes.
Yeah. So just knowing that the cultural nuances is critical. So
well, and another example of that is that there are multi-generational families that live together. If you ever saw my Big Fat Greek Wedding movie, where the parents live right next door to the family, because actually in some cultures they build a second story so the parents can live upstairs and the family lives downstairs. So no, they're not going to move out of the house. We all stay here together. That's part of our culture. We don't go off and live independent lives. So that I'm reinforcing what you're saying. Yeah.
And by the way, you used the Big Fat Greek Wedding or whatever. The third movie is coming out, supposedly. So obviously, everybody liked it.
Yes.
The other thing I dealt with when I was in an inner city setting and we had a pretty large migrant population is often the grandparents attended the IEP, not the parents, because the parents were working. And in my setting, unfortunately, they didn't have enough interpreters. And so the student themselves would often translate to their grandparent what was being said in the meeting and then translate it back. And I had a young man who had been suspended 6 times. And the whole entire meeting, his grandpa was grinning, and I knew that student was not telling the truth.
Oh, Maury.
And that can happen quite often, whether it's the actual student or it's their sibling or their cousin and if you don't know their language, you don't know that you're actually speaking to the individual that's attending those meetings.
Well, and that's one of the recommendations in our thing is that you really should not use a family member as an interpreter for doing any kind of special ed meeting, let alone a transition planning meeting, because it puts that family member in a compromised position, and it's just not best practice. So let's go to the next slide. Now, those are culturally imposed barriers. Now let's talk about school imposed barriers. Research shows that school systems may have inflexible scheduling for conferences or late notices for conferences. For example, in my book, I talk about an African-American transition planning meeting, and the meeting is held at 3:30 in the afternoon. That's after school hours ends, but mom is a single mom, single parent. She works. She's going to have to leave her job, take a bus across town to get to the meeting. That's not being sensitive to her situation and her circumstances. Limited time for conferences, doing transition planning is a rather large process that involves quite a bit of work, and if you wanted to have a really good, what we call making action plans meeting, where you're actually talking to the parent and talking to the child and getting everybody to lay out their thoughts and ideas on, that takes a lot of time. And so trying to do it at a school during school scheduled hours or after school scheduled hours, not a good idea, not going to work very well. Let me talk to you as a specific example. And when I'm doing transition assessments, which I'm doing all the time now, I'm usually arranging for a 2-hour block of time by Zoom with the parent and the student to do all this transition planning at a time that might be convenient for them. Now, the problem with that for public schools is teachers are usually on a 7:30 to 3:30 type of a work day, and that's their work day. And to do transition planning within that time frame is very challenging. So administrators are going to have to try to create some sort of flexibility for special educators who have to do transition planning, if you're going to do it well, and meet with families or meet with parents during after school hours to figure out creative ways to do that. And I'm not really the one to answer how to do that. That would be more Rhonda's responsibility to figure out how to free up teachers to do that. But it's really difficult unless you send things home and have them come back from the parents to be filled out. It could be done that way. But, there's not a lot of time to do good transition planning conferences, and that is a barrier to getting good information from families. Or an emphasis on documents and versus parent participation. So emphasis on documents is when, well, here's our IEP and here's what we got for, in terms of the vocational, and you're quickly going over the document with the parent, and then you're saying, and these are the transition goals that we came up with. That's not really allowing the parent to participate in the meeting and say what their hopes and dreams are for their child's future. And I got to be honest with you, that's the way transition planning happens. They ask the parent to fill out something, or they ask the student to fill out something, or they take information and put it in the present level of academic performance section under vocational or career, and they use that information to do transition planning. And that's not what IDA intended for us, for how it to be done. Then if we use educational jargon during our IEP meetings, that's also a barrier when we're talking in terms that parents don't understand, or the structure of power and the meeting dynamics is that the parent is a guest at the meeting and there is all these professionals sitting around, and the focus is on each professional giving their report. A parent doesn't feel as if they're really going to be, and then they get maybe 10 minutes at the end or 15 minutes at the end to share their thoughts and ideas. That's the way IEP meetings often go. And you have to understand that from a parent's perspective, they feel talked to versus part of the team and brought in to feel that their thoughts and feelings, and the student for that matter, are taken into consideration. And unfortunately, this is still the way things are going on in schools these days, except when I happen to be involved, because if I'm the transition assessor, I make sure that enough time's put aside so that everybody gets a chance to participate effectively. Okay.
And just a real little story.
Sure.
Parents can be highly educated and can actually know the law and still have difficulty with the system. I had this just surreal conversation with Joanne Cashman. You might know the name, you might not, but she led the team to write Leading by Convening for the U.S. Department of Ed. And we were co-presenting and had a little sidebar conversation while some things were going on. And I was sharing that we have 3 adopted children who had IEPs. and I could not get services for my child, and I was working for NTAC. I could not get one of my children an IEP who had very significant learning disabilities because she wasn't failing, because we were paying tutors 5 days a week to get her through math.
Wow.
And I could not get that child. She had ended up with a 504 and she needed an IEP. Well, Joanne shared the same kind of story to me. And I just said to her, if we sit where we sit with all that we know and the powerful positions that we have, and we cannot get services for our children, what does the average parent do? And then if you back that down a level, what does the parent do that does not have the knowledge of the average parent? And I really have a heart for all this because of that.
Well,
my children all turned out fine. They all, well, not all of them are graduated yet, but they're fine. We got through it. We made it happen, but it wasn't with the school's help, which
well,
is
there's
incredibly frustrating.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that, June. That's unbelievable. There's information at the end of our presentation that somewhat addresses these issues. And I want to say that if people want to enter anything in the chat or a question, or you want to make a comment, that's fine. Let me know. But otherwise, I'll just keep rolling on here.
Well, before you go to that one, speaking from the teacher standpoint of scheduling conferences and things like that, when I have IEP meetings, I may give a date, but if the parents say that they can't meet that date, the way I handle that is, when can you come? I've had IEP meetings where I had a parent, her only off day was Monday. I send it in advance, you know, kind of when I want to have that meeting. Or I've had IEP meetings in the evening because that's the only time that the parent could come. If we can, you know, we know these things, then we can address them. If I say I want the parent here to be an active participant in their child's education.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because you are the opposite of what the first bullet is. You are flexible for your scheduling of conferences, and you're allowing the amount of time. So bless you for that. You know,
and the last thing I want to say is when I first started teaching, and I noticed that I couldn't get a lot of my parents to come to meetings. So I created a letter that kind of spoke to, when I sent the meeting notice home, don't let us plan your child's future without you.
Nice.
And that year when I first started that letter, I had full participation of maybe minus 2 parents, but that one, and then to get them to the end with the senior meeting, I said, congratulations to your child on a successful 4 years. And I wanted to have an end meeting to find out what we were doing when your child was walking out the door. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
I love you.
All right.
All right. So look, here's the thing. This chart is basically to show who speaks most at IEP meetings. And who speaks most at IEP meetings? Special ed teachers speak. Family members only a little more than 10% of the time, you know, and so, you know, it's particularly in a transition planning meeting, the amount of time that special educators should be speaking, and compared to the student or the which is on the far left of the graph, or the family members, this graph should be the opposite. Those lines should be the ones that are highest. The family members and the student should be speaking most when you're doing a transition planning meeting, and the special ed teacher should just be kind of gathering the information. Okay, next slide. So, you know, we can stereotype people because they have lower socioeconomic status. We can make assumptions about them that aren't necessarily fair or accurate or true. As I told you, some CLD groups possess different attitudes toward disability compared to the mainstream culture. It can be anything from, I really don't want my child out in society because it's an embarrassment to our family to have our child out there, to the attitude of, you know, I want my child to have everything that is possible to achieve for successful in life. There's no right answer, and you should never generalize that one CLD group thinks one thing. It just find out what they want and what you need to know. I talked already about interpersonal communication style, high context versus low context communication. We tend to be a culture that, at least in America, you speak up, you say what you think, you speak for yourself, you advocate for yourself. There are other cultures that's disrespectful to do that in a professional situation. And so they may not speak up. They may just nod their heads and go yes and agree, but they're not necessarily agreeing, or they don't even understand what you're saying because they don't speak the language, So be aware of that when you're doing transition planning. And then some CLD groups, they don't understand how the whole school infrastructure works. They don't understand that there's a school psychologist and that there's a school counselor and that there's this, particularly, if they've emigrated from a country where they, were barely able to have their kids being educated in the neighborhood or whatever the village school was, where they didn't have all those services. And now they've made it into our country. They were thankful to be able to get out of there. I'm just thinking of Afghanistan, when we were able to rescue a certain number of people from Afghanistan and bring them over to this country, and now their kids are going to an American school. They don't know the whole infrastructure of American schools compared to the way schools were in Afghanistan when the Taliban controlled the education and stuff. So they might feel as if they're not really part of the mainstream, and they don't really understand the cultural aspects of school. And so, be sensitive to that. Or geographical location and setting, rural. I think, June, you brought up, you didn't grow up on a reservation, did you? No. Okay. But if you're off on a reservation in Arizona somewhere, versus in inner city Los Angeles, those are two radically different locations and settings in which, school services are being delivered. And so, that can make a big difference in terms of services that are available, services that are offered, and understanding, what the context in which the family can use those services. So all of these things are cultural considerations that need to be made. And maybe only one of these fits in your thing, but when I did the research on this, these are all the different things that come up in the research that, parents who report out their experiences with school, what barriers were to them feeling comfortable and respected and feeling able to participate actively. Okay, moving along, next slide. This is a new one for us. Okay, sexual identity is a new one. What happens when the kid who's in special education has two fathers or has two mothers? All right, and we want them to come into school and help do the planning. And you're in a state where transgender or don't say gay, you're in a state like that. And how is that going to make these two fathers feel comfortable coming into school and talking with professionals where they're in a state where the two of them are not respected for who they are and what they are and how they want to raise their child? This is a new problem that we now have that is also part of cultural and linguistic diversity. And non-traditional families. And this is increasing in American society. And it's the issues and the challenges that members of these kinds of this community and these families experience is going to be very similar to the experiences of families who are racially or culturally different. So these are other things that we are now coming into play that aren't in my original book, but if we were expanding, to look at common things that are happening now, are a problem, particularly if you're in a state where this is being pushed back against. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we got a breakout session here. This is gonna, I'll let you set this up, June.
So for this one, we are going to send you again to breakout rooms and we're going to randomly assign them. So you probably won't have, you may have some overlap, but may not. But what we'd like you to do is answer these two questions. We'd like you to answer, what barriers have you faced when working with youth with disabilities from CLD backgrounds? And then, have you found any solutions for engaging in transition planning with those CLD youth and their families? So when we send you to the breakout room, we'd like you to appoint one person to be the note taker and put the notes in Jamboard. If you have any kind of technical difficulties, just message me and I'll pop into your group and make sure you can do that. But if you've used Jamboard, there's little sticky notes that you can use. So you just write on the sticky note. Every room will be writing on the 2 different Jamboards there's one for each question. So don't be surprised if you see other sticky notes going up. I think you can like them. So if you're in the middle of it and you like them, I also think you can share your screen in your breakout room. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I set it up so you can share your screen. So if somebody wants to share the Jamboard, that's being put in there. The last time we went to Jamboard, somebody erased the background visual. If you could not do that, that'd be great because it'll erase it for everybody. And yeah. I will put the link in the chat, but only the note taker needs to go to Jamboard and put the notes in. And when we're all done, we'll come back and we'll share I'll change the screen to the Jamboard so we can share and look at what everybody said. And that'll be something, Rhonda, I will make a PDF of and send to you so you have it. But so basically you're looking at barriers and solutions.
How much time are you taking?
I have a setup I auto did it this time. Last time I had to watch. I have a setup for 10 minutes. Okay. And you'll have a 60-minute countdown, a 60-second countdown of when it's time to come back, and it'll auto poof you back. Any questions? All right, so I'm going to open the, first I'm going to actually put the Jamboard in the chat. Hopefully hopefully you can see it in the rooms too. And then I will send you to your rooms.
Ooh, I saw them being punished.
So if you can't see this when you get to your room, let me know and I'll pop in and give it to you. Okay, here we go. Open all rooms. And Gary, I didn't assign you to a room this time. You need to just stay here. We don't want to lose you. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm going to go grab myself something to nibble on while.
And I'm going to stop sharing one screen and I'm going to share all of these wonderful sticky notes.
Wow, nice.
Everybody seeing the sticky notes?
Oh, so there was a barrier page and then
there was right up here. Nobody used it. It's right up here at the top. You just scroll. I tried to explain it. It's my fault. I didn't say it before you left. So we'll do this. So wait till I'm making sure all of these nobody's on top of each other. You see any others that are overlapping? I think they're all, yep. Okay. So let's go by room and let us know what you found out. So room 1, do you know what rooms you were in? Or should I ask that first? Rhonda was room 3, I know. So if you're with Rhonda, you were room 3. I think Donna, you were room 2. Marion, okay, so room 1. Can you share with us what you talked about? Was that your room, Marty?
No. No.
Did we lose everybody?
Diane, was that us and Liz? Were we
You know,
one?
I'm not real sure, but I'm thinking we must be.
If you
We
want,
undoubtedly, nobody else is saying anything, so it must be
Okay.
us.
okay, so you have the floor.
Well, Liz, why don't you talk? Liz would be a good spokesperson for our group. Liz is a parent. She's kind of on both sides of the table. So she's experienced it both ways. So Liz, do you mind? I hate to throw you under the bus and put you on the spot, but do you mind sharing some things we talked about?
No, that's fine. So for barriers, Lord, I'm blanking out. I know we did talk about the solution of some planning on the front end and having some of those conversations, because I know as a parent, like sometimes it can feel intimidating and overwhelming, the IEP process and that meeting. And, that's a lot of information to keep track of. And so, as we were discussing that, we talked about how if some of these conversations could be ongoing, or maybe kind of if we know ahead of time what we're going to be discussing in the IEP meeting, that kind of relieves some of that pressure to just kind of like, okay, so that you can feel better prepared when you're walking into it.
Well said. Well said.
And if you are on your laptop or your computer, you should be able to see the sticky notes.
Yeah, we talked about, sometimes the logistics of being able to get to the meeting can be a barrier. And the fact that, here again, parents who work and don't always have that vacation time and don't always have that, time to take off, and sometimes, an IEP meeting, you might have an IEP meeting, of course, they're once a year, but, but there are plenty of times when, you may call a meeting to address some things in the IEP that need to be addressed. And, that's could be often. And that's a barrier, how do you work through the things that you need to work through, knowing the various characteristics of the family involved, and what their dynamics are.
Oh, we also talked about the reality of what a school district can provide in comparison to what a child might actually need.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to move us on to group 2. Group 2
I'm going to speak. I'm
had
going to
4
speak
people.
up.
Okay.
I'm going to speak up quickly before they make fun of me. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
My
ma'am.
electronics didn't work in the breakout session.
Oh, no.
We were talking about communication, and Donna, the other Donna, who I love, is talked about communication and how they do makeshift IEP meetings with students to teach them how to communicate and not talk so much. And I was saying that I'd be glad to do that, I'm an old pro at helping with those, that I had a parent once that just completely shut us down in a kindergarten meeting, calling the IEP an IUD.
Oh, God.
And that she didn't care what we said, the child was going to college. And then so we backed up and we were very polite and said, well, this is the plan for your child. And we tried to get back down into that. You said earlier, using real education, not the teacher speak that parents just don't understand. So we had to break that down, and I didn't realize Marion put that in the notes, and she did. But another one of mine that I had that another comment that was made was, I'm from a very rural community where a lot of times parents don't have high expectations for their children because they feel that we've done it. This is the way we've done it. My grandparents did it. We're going to do it this way. And then children will come along that luckily, and I'm pleased with our school system, we spot that they need to have more than is available in our area. So we started trying to expose children to more that's out there and parents early, like when the children are younger, so that they will start kind of warming up to my child can do this and helping. But there are a lot of barriers that we have to cross as special ed coordinators and administrators.
I'm adding this, the Jamboard, because I don't see, I don't see the opportunity one added.
I may not have
So-
said that one in there.
So
but
I'm adding it to the solutions. If I didn't articulate it correctly, let me know. I just put expose children earlier to opportunities. All right. Anything else room 2 wants to add? And if you all would like, I think I can download this as a PDF and I'd be glad to send it out to everybody if they'd like it. Or Rhonda, you can do that when I send it to you. All right, room 3, you're up. I know Rhonda's in there because she came out and got some help.
Tamala, do you want to talk about it, or?
I can.
There you go. We're the pink ones.
Okay. Some of the barriers that we pulled out was that sometimes the parents just don't want to come. Sometimes students' perception of themselves and not wanting others to know that they receive special education services. Another one is sometimes the student actually has a job and can't attend the meeting. And we have working parents who may not be able to attend. Another barrier is students no longer want the service, even though they know it's still needed, even though they have that perception or they don't want anybody to know. And the solutions that we had was be flexible with meeting times to accommodate working parents. I try to be very good at that of, well, when can you come? So, we'll work around it, to make it happen. Webinars or communicate via email, or even had a parent to participate either by Zoom or phone, because some parents say, well, can you send me a Zoom link? I sure can, I'll include you. So, and put them right on and put them in the meeting. Another solution, written communication in a positive manner to invite the parent for participation, because sometimes when they see that IEP letter, they just like the meeting notice, they're like, oh, here we go again. Okay, I need you to be a little more excited about, oh, here we go again. And those are the ones that we had.
Well, and I think people were in agreement with you because there's several sticky notes about phone calls. Phone is 100% better than nothing. And, it's better to have them face to face, but I'd rather have them on a good phone call than nothing. So, and there was
And
another one up here.
Teresa
Yeah.
was in our group as well, and she said she even had IEP meetings on Saturdays and Sundays to accommodate the parents.
That's great. And, and if that's allowable, that's really good. Sometimes our administrators don't work with you for that. So we have all these Falcon Eagle ones. I'm assuming that's somebody's specific school. What was that all about? I'm just curious.
I was just, I think, and Donna Plessel has another one at Montevallo. Auburn University has an Eagles program where students with disabilities apply and can be admitted. And I think that one of the kids from the Gadsden Beautiful Rainbow has just been admitted. And my husband and I were talking to a representative from the Liberal Arts College yesterday. And I think the Eagles program is through College of Education, but she told us, I didn't realize this, she told us that for every student who is admitted, every student who is admitted to the Eagles program at Auburn has 15 students who support them and go to classes with them and go out to dinner with them. So for each student in that program, they've got 15 mentors, student age mentors who are who participate.
So an Eagles program, is that for individuals with developmental disabilities?
It is, yes.
Okay. Okay, so it's probably like a Think College kind of setting?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This is absolutely what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Okay, so this is on my to-do list that I will PDF this and send it out. Rhonda, keep me honest. Don't let me forget. Get busy sometimes.
I hit the record on the chat so that I'll keep it on there.
Okay, so I'm shifting back to our presentation slides. And the focus for the rest of the day, and I think we're good timing here, is on the solutions that have been identified in the research. So these are research-based solutions. We just saw some that are working for you, and I have a feeling some of them are not represented in the research yet. So, and again, if you have questions, comments, put it in the chat, raise your hand. I'm loving this interaction. All right, Gary.
Okay, so you know, in doing the research for the book that I wrote, I talked to people who represent some of these, or who not represent, who are doing some of these bullet points that are in here. And so these come from the field. These don't come from my brain or from research. These come from, you know, from surveying in the field. So, you know, one of the people that I talked to, well, you know, we have parent training centers set up all around the country for to provide training for parents of children with disabilities and resources for them. And one of the persons that I talked to in putting together my book was the person who was in charge of the parent training center in inner city LA, where there's a large Hispanic population. And so some of these ideas come from those sources of information, or from educators like yourselves. And so at the systems level, that means to those of you who are here today, you're the systems level. You're the people who are on the ground doing the job, providing the services to kids with disabilities. So if we can provide cultural competence training to you, it will make you, in turn, hopefully improve the quality of transition services for, you know, families and kids that you deal with that are CLD. And so what we're doing today is an example of the first bullet. And then also to get you to implement culturally responsive approaches. And also the third bullet would be to actually train the parents so that they can become more actively involved. So training the parents is getting the parents to understand what special education is, what the IEP process is, what their rights and responsibilities are. And in doing my transition assessments, every once in a while, I'll come across a parent who knows exactly what they're supposed to do, knows exactly what transition is, and is totally able to advocate. And I'll say to them, well, where did you learn all this? And they said, oh, well, I go to this, you know, I attend these regular parent meetings that are part of this organization. And it's like, that's a perfect example of the third bullet there, where and you'll see it at the end of my slides, that if you can, within your district or within your region, provide parent training to promote their more active involvement so they know what's going on in transition and or special education, that's how you improve the system. That's how you would avoid the challenges that we've talked about earlier in the presentation. So let's go to the next slide. And then how do we improve the pedagogy? That is those of us who are at the, at the ground level, at the teaching level. Several of us have said, well, we've tried to retire a couple of times, and some of us are still out there doing it, So when you are out there still doing it, or Rhonda, you want to provide this information to people beyond who are participating today, but the general population of teachers in special ed in your area that are doing this, expand this training to go further on. That's an example of how you improve pedagogy, how you improve getting teachers to become more aware of cultural and linguistic diversity and what they need to do in order to be responsive to parents who are from different cultural backgrounds, and embrace and include them, as opposed to the opposite, where we push them away. We push them away and we say, you shouldn't be here, or, you don't belong in our schools, or, we take books off the library shelves that talk about this stuff. That's the opposite, of what this is talking about. This is trying to improve the attitudes in our teachers to make them more sensitive to wanting to include. And I've got to believe, and still do, that the majority of us who are in education and in public education are people who believe in inclusive-based practices, as opposed to the things that our politicians are doing these days in the schools. I think most of us have good hearts, especially special educators, because I don't understand why you would go into special education if you don't have a good heart, and if you don't care about, wanting to make the world a better place for all kids. I don't see why you would have ever gone into special education. It's certainly not for the paycheck, so let's move to the next slide. So how do we improve awareness? Well, we improve awareness by what we're doing today, by increasing our understanding of cultural groups and other people, and understanding the historical backgrounds and the traditions and the different ethnic and racial groups that are in the U.S. I think it's perfectly appropriate to be curious about a culture that you don't know about, and within the context of a situation where you're in formal or informal setting, and you can actually ask parents, so tell me what is your personal value with respect to your family, and how does that fit within the value of your culture? Or doing some of the so just going through the exercise that we did earlier today, where we talked about what culture is and what defines culture, and sitting down amongst a group of people and saying, gee, what's your background? What's your culture? What are your values? I just find that stuff fascinating because I'm a curious person. But if we want to increase our awareness of other groups, and there are a ton of groups out there that we can become more aware of, it's just being curious about those things. And I think most people in their culture, if you ask them questions about their culture and their value, they're usually very proud of who they are and what their culture is, and they're more than happy to share these things with you. Increase your awareness of the importance of mediating factors such as family configuration. For example, certain cultures, it's the father who's the dominant person in the family who speaks for the family. In other situations, it's the mom who might have the who wears the authority hat in the family. Sexual and gender identity, geographical location, all of these aspects are mediating factors that can affect how a family looks upon their worldview of things, their view of their child, and their view of your child's future. So the more things that you can learn about a family and understand about their family values, the more effective you will be at interacting with that family, regardless if they are culturally and linguistically diverse. I think these things are important in general anyway. Let's move to the
And
next slide.
I would just add that I love that you use the word curious, Gary. I think
Oh.
that's really important. I feel like there are some well-meaning people that have created like surveys to send to parents or little interview questions to send to parents to get some more background. And a lot of this becomes, even though it was well intended in the first place, it becomes extra work to do and it gets rushed. And families feel that. So having that genuine curiosity, I think, can really help us connect.
Yeah, and I also think that people can read your body language and people can read your emotional vocal tone when you talk to them about things. And I can be curious and be rude, or I can be curious and be empathetic and open, you know. And so I've been a curious person all of my life, but my point is that, and if my curiosity was ever offensive to another family for the questions I asked or how I said it, I would immediately apologize. I would immediately say, you know, I'm sorry, that wasn't my intent. My intent was, and then move on from there. So I like what you said, June, because I think curiosity, if used in a proper, caring and empathetic way, can go a long way to helping you connect with a different culture, a different person, a different anything. Because, you know, you come across people who are different from you all the time, and you know, it's a curious person would like to know about that, not being rude or intrusive, but just curious. You know, so I appreciate that. All right, positive perspective on families. So that's what you're doing with how you present yourself. You're seeking to understand. You're seeking to understand what that parent's perspective is, what their hopes are for their child, what their concerns are, and what their suggestions might be. And you're also wanting to make the parents aware of what the school can offer to them and do for them, so that we're in a partnership as opposed to an adversarial relationship. We're not in an adversarial relationship. We're here to be partners with you. We're here to make life better for you and your child. And we're all here on the same page to ultimately make the world a better place. And so I think if you show the parents that you have these kinds of things to help their child at school, and then if they choose to turn them down for whatever reason they choose to turn them down, well, that's their choice. But if you come to them with an open heart and an open hand to offer them services for the school, hopefully they'll take advantage of it. And then gain cross-cultural skills necessary for successful exchange and collaboration. In my book that I wrote, I talk about a researcher who speaks about skilled dialogue. And skilled dialogue is good dialogue, which works for any situation in communication. But when you're communicating with a family that's of a culture different than yours, skilled dialogue is put out there in such a way that you are collaboratively working together when you're communicating with the parent. You listening, them talking, you listening, and trying to be very skillful in how you do that, so that it's not one-way communication or a power structure of communication where there's the school authority speaking down to the parent, and the parent doesn't feel respected or included. But we're trying to create a dialogue that crosses barriers, cultural barriers, any type of barriers, so that we're skillfully communicating with each other and listening to each other. To me, that's a no-brainer, but someone made an entire career on discussing skilled dialogue and writing a book about how to do that. So that's what we're talking about here. Conducting your assessments in a way that the parents understand. It's in their first language. Let me tell you, when I'm doing my transition assessments and I speak to parents and I want to know what their hopes and dreams are for their child's future, if they don't speak the language, I asked the school district to provide me with an interpreter. It would be best if I could have an interpreter who also understands special education and transition, as opposed to just somebody who speaks the second language. And in a lot of instances in school districts in special education, there are interpreters who have been doing interpreting in special education contexts a lot. Is that true, Rhonda, with your personnel, that your interpreters are from special ed, or are they just general interpreters for the whole district?
I think we'll leave that one open to people out in the field that are, you may have experienced that. Because I'm not sure at the State Department level, like I said, we're the ones that set up the meetings and disseminate funds, but and it's the coaches that would see that possibly, or know if that happens. But I know we have interpreters because you have to. Yeah. Well, can any of you who are participating in this webinar today speak to that? Are the interpreters that you have just general interpreters for the entire school district, or are there specific interpreters who work in special education that do interpreting?
I don't think that I could answer that honestly. Typically I work with coordinators or in job coaches, and I do go into the classroom and work with teachers, but we don't have discussions about meetings and whether or not they have that typically doesn't come up, although that's something that we can certainly look at addressing or asking about when we meet with our new districts.
Okay.
In this next 5-year grant. I'm sure they do. I really do, especially in an area where, or if that's what it requires. I feel like they're going to do what's necessary if the resources are available.
Right. Well, let me just say, for me, when I'm doing a transition assessment, and I have it's most typically been a Spanish-speaking parent, and I want to, and I'm going to do a Zoom session with a Spanish-speaking parent at a time that's convenient for them, typically in their home. And I say to the school district, I need a Spanish interpreter to be able to do this with me. And I've never gotten any school district to say, oh, well, we can't provide you one. Find one on your own and charge us for it. I've never had that happen. But so they'll get me a Spanish interpreter. I'll speak to that Spanish interpreter. I will send that Spanish interpreter in advance the transition assessments that I'm going to use to speak to the parent that I need to have translated into Spanish. And I allot more time to do the assessment than would be happening if I'm doing a Zoom session with a parent that's speaking English and we're doing it in English. And then I arrange it up so that the interpreter and myself and the parent are all either on a phone conversation or on a Zoom conversation, so that I can do the transition assessment. And it works out very, very nicely. And the parents feel well respected. They feel as if they've had an opportunity to participate in their son or daughter's future and state. And then, of course, I'm not sharing with you my transition assessment forms. I mean, I can do that, but there are all kinds of questions about, where do you hope your child will live 5 years from now? What do you hope they're going to do when they graduate from high school? What kind of job might they be interested in? And so all the information about transition is on that form. And, I have the parent help go through that. And then I'll also interview the parent with the Spanish translator. So that's worked out very well. So that's my point, is that you need to make sure that you conduct these assessments and surveys in the primary language of the parent. And if you don't have someone who speaks that primary language, you can use somebody in the community who could do that for you. Or there are parent training centers, usually sponsored by IDEA all around the country. And you can usually go to make contact with a parent training center and find somebody who will speak the language of that family. I mean, for example, I rarely have any interactions with Cambodians here in Southern California. But if you're in Minnesota, or where there's large Hmong populations or in other places, or there's Muslim populations, you need to find somebody who can do that interpreting for you. It's very important. So establish, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say was, what's important here is that districts begin to do needs assessment and surveys for all parents. And I don't know that that's probably, the practice, especially early on, especially when we're beginning to look at transition middle school, elementary setting, I think it would be refreshing for parents to include them in some kind of needs assessment and survey about what do you expect of us, of the school community, and what are your hopes and dreams for your child? Because so many times in those early years when children are identified, parents go through a grief process, and it's difficult. And so I think this would be a positive thing to do, to say, yes, this is the disability, and yes, these are the challenges, but golly gee, what are your hopes and dreams? What are some things that that you'd like to see your child be able to do? So I think to be in that practice of just doing a needs assessment and a survey for all parents early on, and I don't know that that's true in every district.
That's an excellent suggestion. Well, also I wanted to say that, and this is just a horrible thing to even think of, but to make an assumption that parents don't care because they can't speak the language, that they don't want to participate in the process, is just a very, very ignorant assumption, for lack of a better word. We need to find them where they're at, as opposed to expect them to find us where we're at. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say was, when I do my transition assessments, when it gets near IEP time, I send a parent transition questionnaire home. And we have a high population of Spanish speaking students. So I found if I'll talk with the student and I say, I ask, do your parents just speak Spanish only? If they tell me yes or whatever, I'll send that send that transition questionnaire home in Spanish.
Beautiful.
And then when it comes back, I get the Spanish teacher to tell me, okay,
that's exactly
what does this say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I've done the same thing. I have some of my assessments that are translated into Spanish, send them home, and then I've got to get the Spanish interpreter at the school district to tell me what the answers are.
Okay.
So that's what I do. So,
Pamela, that is the best use of gen ed I have heard in a while. And just think of how much you're engaging that gen ed teacher in transition, just in general at your setting. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. All right. So establish organizations or committees to work collaboratively for the benefit of the children. You can, at least when I was, I think it's still in practice, we had committees that were basically parent multicultural committee, of parents of the different cultures that are represented in our school, who were part of a parent group that would periodically get together and inform my elementary school that we worked in on what were things that we needed to be aware of, that were things that what their needs and wants were, or they were part of the general parent advocacy council that we had in our school. Now, conducting home visits in which parents are able to speak freely about their expectations and concerns for the children. This is very easy to do now, because with Zoom, we can do home visits without having to physically go to the home. And if there's one good thing that came out of COVID, it's that most homes now know how to use Zoom and have a computer to be able to use Zoom, or their kids have a computer that's been provided by the school district. So home visits aren't such a difficult thing to do anymore. Although, again, this may have to happen outside of school hours to make it happen. But I'm doing home visits all the time now. Before COVID was happening, I was doing the visits in person. But since we've got Zoom now, I don't have to necessarily travel to the parents' home to get the information and see them face to face. So again, these are suggestions in the literature on how we can improve, culturally responsive practices in the area of transition. Let's go to the next slide. We can also send information to parents in the form of newsletters in their home language. We can conduct meetings or at community centers to inform parents about school activities. There can be family nights at school. We have back to school typically and open house. Those are examples of where, we can have parents know what's going on. Interactive journals. When I was a resource specialist, for the 10 years that I was a resource specialist, I used to send home a weekly, those little essay books that we have. I'd write a note to every parent for the week on what was done with their child and what, how they were progressing on their objectives. And the child would take that home and bring it back on, the next day or after the weekend. And so, this is a way to communicate. I didn't have to do too much in different languages at that time, but again, these are other ways that we can be in touch with parents. Let's move to the next slide.
I'm gonna unmute. Gary, we've got, I think, about 10, 12 more minutes to give content, just so you are aware.
All right, where are we at on slide number? This is, okay. Okay. I think if we're running short on time, I think some of the slides can be read. The only other thing that I want to say, and then I'll turn it over to you, June, is that the parent training centers that have been set up around the country, and I believe, are they still being funded, June? Because I'm not out there to know if parent training centers are still being funded.
Yeah, but we still have some time. Do you want to skip forward to implications for transition practice?
Sure.
I think that, and you all will get all of the slides. So there you go.
All right. So this is strictly within the context of communication, within transition. So try to get to know the CLA family's cultural background and their beliefs when planning transition goals for their child. They may just give this to you when you're talking to them, but respect a CLD parent's perspective. In my book, I have an example of a Hawaiian culture where they were doing a transition planning meeting with a parent and the parent of the child, George Palamalu is the name of the kid. And the family is in the business of entertainment in the Hawaiian Islands. And so they play music at the luau's, and all the families are musicians, and George is a musician too, and he's playing very well. And they had the transition planning meeting, and they're telling the parents, to get a good job, you need to get a good education. So George should go to college, and the parents are saying, George isn't go to college. When he gets out of high school, he's going to join our band and play with all the rest of us. That's what everybody does in this family. It's a family tradition. And the teacher who is recently trained in California and went over to Hawaii to be a special ed teacher says, well, I remember when I was growing up and John Kennedy said to get a good job, get a good education. So I think it's important for you to consider having George go to college. And you've got this cultural conflict going on in this example that I had. It's purely fictional that I set it up. But what I'm saying is that you need to listen to a parent's perspective on their child and also what the child has to say, because when the teacher turned to George and said, well, what do you want to do, George? Or even asked George outside of the pressure of the parents being there, George said, yeah, I want to play with my parents' band. That's what I've always planned to do in my life. So it's just an example of the second bullet there, that we need to not put our value system on the values of a family or a child. We need to ask and listen to their perspective and do as much possibility of being flexible and open. Or on the other hand, if it looks like the child is going to be in a situation that isn't going to be very productive for them, maybe we need to find a way to positively influence the parents to consider something else. But the point is that we need to listen, and we need to be considerate of their value system. So that's basically what we're saying in this set of slides. Now, you also want to let them know what the law is and why we're doing this process. That special education law is written in such a way that families used to not have any choice in terms of what was going to happen with their child in the future. But now we are in a situation where we want kids to advocate for themselves and families to be advocate. And so in transition practice, you know, you need to be sensitive to also the basic survival needs of the family. For example, in some instances, the parents need their child to work and also contribute a paycheck to the home because they can't afford to live. Right now, the rents are going high. You know, they need their child to work to contribute to the family structure. And so encouraging the child to leave the home sometimes might be counterproductive for what the family needs. So just be sensitive and check your attitudes when interacting with them, but always act professional is what I'm saying on this slide. Go ahead, next slide.
I kind of wanted to chime in about the basic survival needs. I think we lose track of that sometimes, that when you think about Maslow's hierarchy, many of our families are in survival mode. And the school part of it, they know it's important, but it's not as important as putting food on the table, as taking care of health needs and things like that. So, and the other thing I would say is I have observed in way too many situations how a family might leave the building and then all of the gossip and smack, I don't know what else to call it, but the smack talk starts. I feel like, to Gary's point here on the last one, we're the professionals and we may end up being the only advocate that these students have in our buildings. And we really need to present that professional face and keep our, you know, our humor, our inappropriate humor, especially, and some of those just attitudes, we need to keep those in check and be the champion that our kids need. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's good. You take me back, June, to that teacher who told me that you know, Salvador's father doesn't come to IEP meetings because he doesn't care about education anyway. You know, that's an attitude that I couldn't believe. My jaw dropped when he said that, you know, so yes, yes. So take time to build trust and rapport and credibility with these families, so that they don't fear that they're participating in the meeting or having an objection to something that you're going to do is going to lead to a negative consequence for them. Provide them with materials and connections with other families like them and other people who can help them better understand. I can't tell you how many times when I felt so good inside when I talked to a parent, and they're typically, for me, they've been Hispanic parents who already know everything about transition law because they've been participating in a parent group of kids with disabilities in the Hispanic community, or parents with autism that will all be in a community together, and they've all been interacting together and know everything there is to know. That's terrific, you know. And if you could connect people who aren't in that type of a group with a group to make them feel supported. I remember when I did my my master's thesis or project, and one of the parents said to me, one of the most important things about having a child with a disability is knowing that you're not alone out there, that there are other people like you, that there are other families like you. So connecting families to one another is very, very proactive and uplifting for them. Keep an open mind, and so we've covered a lot of ground. June, I think you're taking care of the exit ticket part here.
We have. There's a lot. There was a lot in the slides, and you'll get a copy of them. But you've heard a lot today, you've discussed a lot today. And what we'd really like to know is what one thing, so just if everybody just started with one thing, we could start changing this. So we would like to ask you to identify one thing that you heard today that you plan to put in practice over the next year. And we would ask you to write it publicly in the chat box. And then we've talked to Rhonda, and what we'd really like to do is a year from now, come back and hear your story about that. Were you able to do your one thing? Did you change what your one thing was? What were your barriers? What helped you do your one thing? And it doesn't have to be a mountain. It can be a molehill, but just making those steps in progress. So if you want to take a second to put it into the chat, that would just be wonderful. If you're feeling like you don't want to share it with the whole group, you can just message it to me. So in the chat box, there's a to, and you can just put to June or to Gary and just message it to us. But we would love to talk with you again and just see, what did you take out of today, and make a decision to actually, put something into practice.
Are you planning to share this out, June, or no?
The chat, we can keep it, and we can share it with you, Rhonda.
Okay.
I'm waiting to see if anybody wants to do it privately, because I don't want to share a whole group if somebody feels like their one thing is
Yeah, it's just I'm asking.
Personal and private.
I'm just asking because I don't want to go into the chat or it'll disconnect my
Oh.
Zoom. So you can share it with me later.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and I actually am saving the chat so that if there's any questions I need to respond to, I can do that. But I can tabulate these, or I'm sure June you'll do that.
But let me ask a question, please. I hate to interrupt right here with something
Sure.
off topic, but it has been so helpful to hear from Tamala today. And I want, Tamala, where are you? I think I must have seen a squirrel out the window when you were introducing yourself. And I apologize for that.
I'm at Bessemer City High School.
Wonder. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I was going to say the same thing, Marion. That's funny because I wrote myself notes, and I said I wanted to thank Tamala, Teresa, and Liz for these are the teachers and parents who are participating. So
yeah.
if given the opportunity for more to have come, they would have. But I also thank my my State Department colleagues for joining in as well, because we can at least in the coaching aspect provide this information to teachers too. So it really is, but it was sweet to hear Tamala and Teresa come up with the solutions, and they've seen the barriers, they live the barriers. So excellent point, Marion, excellent.
Okay, if you're still writing, that is just fine. You can continue to write. It looks like most people have responded. But just in summary and conclusions, if you haven't taken anything else out of today, transition is complex and it's challenging and it's hard work. And don't feel alone. As we talked today, I felt like the community was building here, and I felt like actually I get to be part of the community a little bit. And then CLD status increases the complexity and the challenges faced by everyone involved in the transition process, from families to administrators. And research validated, a research validated literature base now exists to help you all in this process. But I would also say to that, we still need more research done. So thank you for participating in the survey, because that is one aspect of being able to contribute to the research. And then that big conclusion at the end of you are not alone. And Gary and I thought it'd be fun to share with you what our next steps are, because we have kind of a big one. Would you like to speak to that, Gary? And it's because, Rhonda, you asked us here.
Yes.
So,
Are you talking about the second bullet there?
yeah.
Yeah, I know that makes me shake in my boots. Because it's like, my wife kept saying to me, as everyone has said here, aren't you supposed to be retired? So we've approached Brooks Publishing Company about doing an update on the book that I told you about, and so that's a possibility. It keeps the brain active and going, but every time I just sort of try to disappear into the woodwork, June kind of comes and pulls my chain. So I don't know what else is due professional development wise, but I do want to say thank you for the opportunity, Rhonda, to do the professional development for you and your staff, and all the great communication you've had with us all along the way. It was a pleasure to work with you.
Well, the feeling is very mutual, and it's nice to see, and I wish you could see a little closer, but I have a lot of gray hair as well. I didn't get to share earlier, but I've got 45 years in the education system as well. But it's nice to see, a group of retirees that really still have this passion for sharing the information. And I think what we found, and I hope that Tamala and Teresa can give a good amen to that, the common thread throughout all 5 of these is people who work with transition are extremely passionate about what they do. That's the first thing that I found. The second thing is they are freely giving their resources and materials. I mean, they're just wanting to disseminate these to the masses so that ultimately we can change mindsets for teachers and parents and have a better transition for our students who will ultimately benefit and actually will benefit, because if we have high expectations for them, that's the other piece that people have kept saying, raise the bar, expect something from them. Everybody can work at something. Everybody can do something after school is over if we have a good transition plan. So I've learned a ton. And it's just been exciting to have that enthusiasm throughout these series. So Tamala and Teresa, I hope you felt that too, because I've seen them on a lot of them. So thank you guys for doing that.
Gary and I have our contact information on there on our slides that you will get. If you got a previous round of slides, I'm not sure, Rhonda, if you sent them out. I had Gary's phone number wrong, but we have our email and our phone number. We really would like to hear from you. So if you have any questions, if you need resources, we will do what we can to be able to get you answers and get you connected with resources. This is big work, and we just love and want to thank you, this last slide, for what you are doing to change lives of youth with disabilities. So we appreciate that.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day and summer vacation.
And there is an evaluation, Rhonda. I don't have the slide, so you want to share that?
Yes, let me put that in, please, y'all. Let me do that. It's down here on the bottom. Let's see, it's in a Word document. I'm going to give you the let's see. I'm sorry, I got so excited about what y'all were talking about. But yes, please click on that link and it will take you directly to the evaluation. It takes you a couple seconds to do it. It's really not that much, but it put in some good stuff. I appreciate it. So.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so
Great,
glad.
great information.
Thank you all. Are we
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And if anybody needs me,
Thank you. Bye.
bye, Teresa. Thank